Hey guys, welcome back. Today we wanted to talk about another part of the reality of moving to a new country, especially if it's somewhere that's completely culturally different than what you're previously used to, and you have to keep in account all the little norms and adjustments you have to make to get used to and settled in and adjusted properly. So last time we talked a little bit about the different logistics and paperwork and little details that you need to keep in mind when setting up your whole life in a brand new country. So this video is going to be a little more about the cultural adjustment you might have to make and more norms and society related things to keep in mind when you're moving to a new country. So something that we've heard people talk about, especially when they're moving to North America from a different continent like Europe or Asia, where culturally it's a lot different in terms of looking for jobs and networking and how the whole process works. It's just how different it can be here in North America, because in many countries around the world, looking for a job is as easy as just submitting your resume online and then interviewing and going to work. But here in the US or Canada, you have to network a little bit more, especially for more corporate jobs, and sometimes do internships or co-ops and get your foot in the door that way before you're considered for a full-time position. And just submitting applications online doesn't necessarily get you an answer back or get you an interview even. So if you're looking for a job in a new country, it's really important to keep in mind how their process works, and whether it's as simple as submitting something online or whether you have to make a connection and really have to network and get to know someone in order to get your foot in the door. For example, when we were in undergrad in the US, they had career fairs at our university where you could go up and talk one-on-one with a representative from a bunch of different companies and hand them your resume and make that connection that way. But the thing about those career fairs was that they were specifically looking for students and new graduates and had open positions already prior to even coming to recruit there. So it might be different if you're an experienced person in your field already and you're not coming straight out of school. So you don't have like a room you can walk into with employers ready to offer you a job. And you might have to know how to reach out to people in your field, even who to contact, who's appropriate to talk to, how much time they should give you, and being okay with cold emailing, cold calling, or just not even hearing back sometimes, which can really hurt your self-esteem at times. So a lot of these different processes, how it works in the US and Canada, is not the same as how it would work in Europe or Asia. And a lot of people, when they move to North America from those different cultures, face this problem in not knowing how to network and not knowing how to get your foot in the door and even get a job. But vice versa, it might be a little different if you're moving somewhere where the process is a little more straightforward and all you have to do is submit your resume and interview and get the job. So it's important to do your research and know what the job search process and the job market is like in wherever you're interested in moving, and understanding what you need to do in order to get employed in that country.
One thing to keep in mind when you're moving to a new country is figuring out what's considered appropriate and what's not. And this is usually not too hard. You can do a quick Google search or maybe ask around if you know anyone from that country. But there are certain things that might be very normal and day-to-day life things for you, but those things might not be considered appropriate in another country. So a really common thing is, for example, dress codes. So in some countries, certain dress codes are followed, even if they might not be like a requirement or a rule, but there are certain ways of dressing that are considered more appropriate. So it's important that you learn and understand about the culture before you move there, because whether you agree with it or not, it's very important to respect the cultures and the norms that are followed in the country you're moving to. Another thing a lot of people kind of miss out on is safety. For example, personal safety is very important if you're moving to a country alone or with your family. A lot of times we have preconceived notions of what safety looks like in certain countries, but that can be far from the truth.
Now, especially if you're moving to a new country alone, it can be very nerve-wracking and even lonely, because not only do you have to go through all of this transition yourself and handle all the logistical parts yourself, but you're also new to the culture and you might not know many people and might not have anyone to ask questions to. And this whole process can be very anxiety-inducing. Even moving to a new city can be anxiety-inducing sometimes. So moving to a whole new country and a completely different environment is very difficult when you have no one to support you through it, especially there with you in person. For example, if you're moving to a new country where grocery shopping, for example, is different, you might not know what to search up to find the nearest grocery store near you. Or maybe you don't have a car and you can't go drive yourself to the nearest grocery store and you might have to order groceries instead. So it's little things like that are just the general everyday differences in different countries that you have to keep in mind. And you also have to deal with alone, which is so hard and so stressful. And for me personally, I've really gotten overwhelmed by this and having to handle everything by myself, even if it's not a new country and even if it's a new city I'm moving to. Just having to do everything by yourself is so lonely. And just having to deal with everything yourself is just so much pressure you're placing on yourself as an individual. For example, even something like public transportation in a big city can be very difficult to figure out for someone who's not used to taking the subway or taking the bus. Thankfully, there are tools like Google Maps and City Mapper that give you very clear-cut instructions on which bus to board, which stop to get off at, and things like that. But it's still a little anxiety-inducing if you've never done it before. And even figuring out where to get like a Metro card or putting money on it over and over again is something that is not the same in every city and even every country. So that's something that might take a little bit of figuring out and a little bit of research online before you can actually go and take that first subway ride and explore the city. And moving to a new country alone, you obviously want to try to make friends and get to know people in your community and really build that sense of belonging, which can be really difficult to do, especially if it's somewhere that's culturally different, because you might not speak the language properly or you might not know how to connect with people from that culture and they might have different norms and customs. So that's something that's another challenge you might face. And thankfully, there are a lot of tools to meet people, especially through apps or groups online. And we have a whole another video on how to make friends in a new city, so feel free to check that out. But just that whole process of getting to know someone and forming those connections from scratch, and that waiting period where you're just acquaintances with someone and then slowly building up a closer relationship and then finally becoming good friends, can be pretty lonely in itself. And if you're like me and you're very selective in who you let into your inner circle, the process might be even more exhausting and you might take even longer to find your close-knit group of friends. It's really important to not be disheartened by all the loneliness and still be prepared for a little bit, at least until you get those friendships and you get those relationships going. But once you do find your people and once you do form those close friendships, it can be so much fun and you can have so much fun exploring the city and getting to know about other people's backgrounds and sharing your own experiences in this new country. So it's all about sticking it out until you find those friendships and make those relationships, and it's all gonna be worth it at the end.
Cultural shock can be a very real thing and can hit people very differently and in very unique and interesting ways. So you can do all the research you want, and you should do a decent amount of research before you move to a new country, but there will still be a learning curve and you will still experience a certain level of cultural shock. And I think it's just better to embrace the fact that you might face cultural shock instead of resist it and try to be 100% prepared for it, because I don't think anyone can be 100% prepared for cultural shock. For example, I've moved around so many times and I still face cultural shocks. And I've moved back to places I've lived in before and I've still gotten cultural shock the second time around. One recent example that I remember and makes me chuckle is when I moved to the US, something interesting that I noticed, I don't know if this is a cultural shock necessarily, but when I was walking in between classes or when I was just walking in my dorm, if I saw someone I knew, they would say hi and they'd be like, "What's up? How's it going?" Or they'd do this like head nod. They'd be like, "What's up?" And I saw that as a question, like, you're asking me how I am. So I'd pause and be like, "I'm doing good." Give maybe another sentence or two, elaborate on how I'm doing, and then ask them how they are. And as I got more and more accustomed to the place, I realized that's just a way of saying hi. It doesn't necessarily require a response. So you can be like, "What's up?" And then the other person calls and be like, "What's up?" And then you continue on with your day. It doesn't require you to stop and like have a conversation. And I thought that was kind of weird, because in my head, if someone's asking me a question, it requires a response. Like, why are you asking me a question if you don't want a response back? But over time, I just learned that's just something that's considered normal there, and I got past it. It was not a big deal. It wasn't something I would say deterred my experience there or anything. In fact, now that I think back on it, it really makes me laugh. And I talk to some of my friends about it. I'd be like, "Hey, remember when I was new and I thought that if someone's asking me what's up, it requires I stop and respond like what's up. And these are just some small things you learn when you get to the place, and it's not necessarily something you need to prepare for, because if anything, it's just a funny experience. So essentially, cultural shocks can look different for different people, and I think my mantra is that as long as I'm learning, as long as I'm experiencing and being respectful of other people, I'm good. So I hope you guys learned something about moving and the cultural aspect of it, and let us know in the comments down below what you thought of our video. And if you guys have any suggestions, we'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks, see you guys next week. Bye.